Hello. Welcome back to my channel. I am Monet and you're watching Life is Monet. I know that April was a bit of a rocky month for me in terms of content because I really just got so busy, but I am back. The semester has ended for me and I'm excited to dive into some more books and push out more content for you guys. But today we're gonna be wrapping up all of the books that I read in the month of April. I'm still technically behind on my TBR, but I did read quite a few books in the month of April and I felt really confident that I'll be able to catch up in the month of May. So very excited about that. I have my list in front of me, my spreadsheet. I'm gonna pull it up and we're gonna go through all the books that I read in April. So the first book I read in the month of April is All Systems Red, which I found to be extremely humorous. Like, I was entertained by this murder bot and like just his level of like sarcasm. I just found it very amusing. We're following this murder bot, which is essentially this robot or like artificial intelligence that's assigned to these groups of like scientists, and they're supposed to protect them from people who might kill them in a robbery or things like that. And this artificial intelligence has become sentient, and for most of the book his team is actually not aware, and just watching him and like his anti-social characteristics and the things that he just finds interesting and that he would rather go be doing, and how he just really does not want to engage in conversations with them. He has this kind of like bad reputation around him because there's something that happened that we actually don't witness in the book that is catastrophic to his last team that he was assigned to, and he was supposed to be like reprogrammed. And so for this to be a novella, I actually found it to be a very entertaining story. In terms of like the characters, I enjoyed Murderbot and the other characters that we followed, and I enjoyed their interactions. I don't think that I cared so much for the plot. Not saying that it's a bad plot, but like, was I there for the plot? No, I was not. I was definitely there for the characters, and I feel like as soon as I closed the book, maybe like a week later, some parts of the plot just really started leaving my brain because I really wasn't paying that much attention. I was just very entertained by Murderbot himself. The second book that I read was Remote Control, and this is a book that I previously tried to read last year and I ended up DNFing because it just was not working for me. And when I went back into this book and started reading it again from the beginning, I felt the same way. However, when I got to about 50% into the novella, even though short, I enjoyed the story more. I am not a fan of how the story was rolled out. Now that I finished the book, I could see why the author chose to start in that spot, but I don't find the first half of this book, or maybe like the first quarter of this book, to be very engaging, and I didn't find that it held my interest or like even piqued my interest. So because I still own this book even after I DNF'd it last year, I decided to actually read this all the way through to see if maybe I was going to end up unhauling it. I'm actually glad that I read this book to the end because when I first read it, I've read the first 50 pages, which is like essentially like the first 25% of the book. And that is to me the weakest part of the book. It definitely gets better as you get more into the story. And so I feel like I judged the book off of the weaker parts of it without seeing it through to the end. So I'm actually not going to be unhauling this. I do feel like I would continue reading more works from the author, especially if they have like more novellas. The next book that I read was Recursion, which I have like feelings about this book. So I have had very many misses with adult sci-fi as of late, and it's been taking me a while to find an adult sci-fi that I like. And after reading this book, I kind of had like this epiphany of I have realized that I like adult sci-fi. I just do not like space operas. The last few adult sci-fi books that I've tried to read have been space operas, and they have literally put me to sleep. I've DNF'd them so many times, and I just cannot make it through to the end. I DNF'd To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. I DNF'd Leviathan Waits. I almost like did not make it through Red Rising. I just have found that adult sci-fi in space just does not hold my attention. However, there are other adult sci-fi that I have enjoyed that include time traveling, things that play with like the Mandela effect and just warped realities. All of those things I find that I really, really enjoy. And so that is like what I liked about Recursion. It played on the Mandela effect in a really fun way, and I enjoyed the way that the author told the story. I definitely expected this to be more of like a psychological thriller, but it's definitely way more like sci-fi than it is psychological thriller. However, what I did not necessarily enjoy about this book is a writing style that I have seen Shauna Maguire do in Middle Game. And if you've read Middle Game, you know that there's a like part of the book that lags and it's like drawn out and it's done purposely. Like the author puts you in this loop and you literally just have to like make it to the end of the book for it all to make sense. The same writing technique was used in Recursion, and we literally got trapped in this loop. And I just find that like I do not like that. I do not like this sense of like going in a circle, especially when it's for an extended period of time. It also took away from like my engagement in the book, only because the characters in this book are trying to accomplish this thing and they fail at it repeatedly for an extended period of time, just like in Middle Game. So if you've read Middle Game, then I'm sure you have a clear picture of what I'm talking about. And if you haven't read Middle Game, just know that there is a point in this book where you are in this continual purgatory that seems like it is never going to end. Other than that, I'm really excited to continue reading more books by Blake Crouch because his writing style reminds me of what I really enjoyed about Max Berry, who wrote The 22 Murders of Madison May. I enjoy the way both authors cover adult sci-fi, and they don't put me in a purgatory of a space opera and I make it through the book without falling asleep. So I feel like this is gonna be my little niche of adult sci-fi. I'll read all the books in this area, and I'm probably gonna stay away from space operas for a long time because they literally just put me to sleep. The next book that I read was Circe, and I read the Song of Achilles, and it was okay. I think I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I just did not love it as much as everyone else did, but I had like this small kind of hope that I was gonna enjoy Circe more than I enjoyed the Song of Achilles, and I was not wrong. I did enjoy this book so much more. I enjoyed this book more so for the underlying themes in the book and like what it represented in terms of like being a mother, being a wife, being a goddess, and how you're perceived through different perceptions and like perspectives throughout history. I did not always enjoy Circe's personality traits, but that's just a personal thing to me. I still feel like she was very fleshed out. I still feel like the author definitely brought her to life off the page. I just didn't necessarily like the person who came off the page, if that makes any sense. But I still really enjoyed the commentary. I enjoyed the story that she told, and I really thought like Odysseus was going to be a huge part of this book. And there was just so much about Circe that we got to see before he even came into the story and even after. And her character growth in this book, I really enjoyed. Like her journey throughout this book is wide-ranging. She has a period where she's just a very naive, head over heels and puppy dog love kind of girl, and then there's a moment in time where she's like very scornful and resentful of all the things that have happened to her, and then her being optimistic and her coming into her power and like wielding it in this way. And then there's an exploration of motherhood in this book and what it means to really raise a child and trusting them to go off and make their own decisions, but also wanting to protect them from the ugliness of the world. Like the overall like archetypes and like story arcs in this book I enjoyed more than just Circe herself. The next book that I read was Lost in the Neverwoods. This is a Peter Pan retelling. I ended up giving this book 2 out of 5 stars. I felt like it was very okay. Like I made it through to the end. It wasn't a terrible retelling at all. I do feel like it's very age appropriate for anyone between the ages of like 8 and 13, especially if they love a Peter Pan retelling. And I feel like if I was a bigger fan of Peter Pan and like the Wendy and the Lost Boys, I would have enjoyed this more. But I only have like this mild interest and like this mild appreciation for Peter Pan. It's not like one of my favorite fairy tales, and so I did not enjoy this book as much. Like I enjoyed it as much as I would enjoy a Cinderella retelling or a Sleeping Beauty retelling. Like I just don't have a huge love for those stories growing up, so it was just mildly interesting to me, unfortunately. I still definitely would gift this to like my nieces and nephews or like some younger cousins that I have in my life, especially if they like Peter Pan, because I really think that they would enjoy it more than I did. The next book that I read was The Raven Boys, and this did not hold up very well. Like this is my first time reading it. This is not a read for me, and I know that like everyone has this huge like nostalgic love for the Raven cycle and just like what these stories mean to them as they read it years ago. But for me, I felt like this was a very weak introduction to a series. Like the characters were so synonymous and interchangeable. Like, I could remember the character profiles for each of the Raven boys, and their names, I was cutting and pasting them left and right. Like, I did this as a buddy read, and like, I'm like, which one is the kid that deals with this, and this, and they would have to tell me who that boy was, because it literally could have been anybody. I feel like we spent way too much time exploring this relationship dynamic between Blue and the Raven boys, and I don't feel like it was very fleshed out. I feel like the magic was definitely all over the place for a while there. It definitely was very blurry. It was not clear at all. The plot was very blurry, and this just felt like a fever dream. Like, reading this book felt very much like a haze, and I'm not exactly sure what to expect going into book 2. I'm expecting it to get better for sure, but like, I know that this is the first book in the series, but like, is it also the first book she's ever written? I don't know. I just feel like, even from an author standpoint, she has to wish that she had wrote this book a little differently. Like, if I had written this book and then reread it years later, I would have been thinking in my head of how I would have changed some things around to make the book better. And I hope that doesn't sound like very judgmental. I just feel like this was a great work in progress. It was a great draft. And I think from here, we should have took it to the drawing board and like really flushed it out. This feels like the first draft, but somehow it made it to being a final product. I don't know. A second buddy read that I did this month was with the Tethered Mage, and I enjoyed this one a lot. Although I wish that this was dual POV, because we have two very dynamic female characters, and I find both of them to be very interesting. But the character that is the most snarky, confident, and humorous, like the most sarcastic, we actually don't get her POV. And I just feel like, first of all, they're both very interesting to follow. So I would have loved if we would have gotten this dual POV from both female characters. But if you're only going to give us one female character, can it be the funny one? Like, I want to be in her head. Like, we have one female character that we are getting the story from, and all the sarcastic remarks are just coming at her and she's just processing them. And she goes through a good amount of like character growth, but it was just like, no, I want to be over there. Like, when she's not on page, I want to be with her. I don't want to be here, unfortunately. So I'm hoping that we do get a dual POV in book 2. There was just so many choices that I think should have been made that would have made this book so much better. Like, if it had a queer aspect to it, that would have been magnifique. If we had both POVs, or the POV of the actual interesting, funny character, that would have been perfect. With the character that we do follow, even though she goes through a significant amount of character growth, I feel like the one person that she should have been put on page with to show her character growth, to like show that she's actually grown and to put it to the test and to see her overcome, actually did not happen in this book. But I wish that it had, because I feel like her character growth would have had that much more of an impact. Also, I'm confused as to how this is a trilogy, because this very much works as a standalone. I found that the story wrapped up almost completely. So when I read the synopsis for book 2, it almost sounded like the author plans to roll out an entirely new like objective in the story, like a different shift in the plot using the characters in the story that she told in this one, which is fine, but I feel like this definitely could have been a very strong standalone. The next book that I read was book 1 in the Night Angel series by Brent Weeks, and book 1 is called The Way of Shadows. It sucked. I mean, wow. Like, it was ass. It was really ass. And like, I finished the book only because I was in disbelief of how bad it sucked. It was bad. And I kid you not, I switched to the audiobook. And as I'm listening to the audiobook and just really grasping the gravity of like how terrible this book was, I went to Goodreads and I was staring at the very high rating on Goodreads and staring at all of the people who gave it 5 stars. It has like over 100,000 Goodreads reviews. And like, I'm on Goodreads trying to make sense of it as I'm listening to the audiobook, because it's not, the math isn't mathing. It's not connecting for me, because this was bad. This was bad. This is definitely going on the worst of the year. Like, no question about it. You'll see this in full depth in all its glory on my worst of the year of 2022 because that was a bad book. I really don't even have like the words. Like, the plot weak, the characters weak, the sexual tension weak. That little love interest, I wanted her dead. Kill her, please, so we can move on. Like, I just wanted everybody on page to just die. What a waste of my time. What a waste of my time. But I made it to the end of this book. So that's a thing. I own the trilogy bind up, so that's a thing. I do plan to read the next one. Listen to the next one. Like, I won't be reading this with my eyes, that's for damn sure. But I plan to listen to the next one and really try to comprehend. Really try to understand. But if you're watching this, let me know if I should just go to his second series. Like, if I should just skip on over there. Because if I keep reading this and it keeps being bad, Brent Weeks, I don't know him. I've never heard of him before in my life. Like, he's gonna lose me as a customer for life. For life. I did one more buddy read in the month of April, and that was on Anatomy. This is a YA historical, like, gothic fiction story about a girl who really wants to be a surgeon, but she lives in a time where women just aren't in the medical field. And there's a lot of grave robbing for corpses and a lot of, like, unethical medical surgical procedures that are happening on people that are poor or homeless. And a lot of the surgeons in this book have this big God complex, and it was just very gothic, and I loved every moment of it. I really enjoyed the main character that we followed. She was resilient and relentless in her pursuance of, like, a career in the medical field, and she had this, like, level of excitement in wanting to work on corpses and dissect body parts and just really get into the world of anatomy. But she has to, like, balance that with her conscience of, like, the practices and the way that we achieve these organs to do surgery on, or the way that we achieve these body parts by stealing them out of the ground, is not necessarily the best way to go about it. And she has a lot of people in her life that actually want to force her as a woman back into the house, dealing with cooking food and having babies and wearing pretty dresses and just being all around taken care of, and that is not something that she wants. All the moving parts of this book I really enjoyed. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and I am looking forward to reading more books by this author because I think that this was her debut, and I've been let down repeatedly into the grave with YA recently, so I did not expect to enjoy this one as much as I did. I found it to be well written. I buddy read this with 3 other people, and I think that the lowest star rating might have been 3 stars, maybe. I think that most of us gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was One True Love by Elise Bryant, and this is a YA romance. It follows a girl who is at the end of her senior year, and there's a lot of pressure on her to have things figured out and to have a set plan in place, but that's just not really her speed. The first, like, 20 or 30 pages, I was like, I don't know if this book is gonna be for me, because we had this little moment where the black girl was, like, hiding in this white boy's closet, and she was being his little side piece, and then he embarrassed her at prom, and I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. But I kept reading, and that seems to be the theme for the month of April, is me learning to have more patience with books that I kind of just know right off the bat isn't gonna work for me. There were so many things that I enjoyed about her as a character and so many things that I did not, and I feel like she was not at a place in her life that a romance should have been happening. And so I would have enjoyed this book so much more if it was a contemporary and we were following her and, like, her growth, because there is a lot to tell there. And I enjoyed that story. I did not like the romance. I did not find it to be healthy. I did not find her to be a person capable of being in a healthy relationship, because she had so many things she needed to work on. And so if that was less of, like, the main focus of this book, if it was just a mild romance like you would find in a contemporary, I would have definitely preferred that, because I was way more invested in her and her growth, because I am also similar to her. I pick up a bunch of things, and people have said that about me, about how I just hop around. But what do you do when you're just great at everything? The next book that I read was The Younger Wife, and I was very excited for this one. I read The Good Sister by this author last year, me and Chanel from Chanel Time, and we both really enjoyed this book. And when I seen that this author was coming out with this one, I put it on pre-order because I'm like, I've seen this author's name before, and it just immediately clicked. In this book, we are following this kind of like family, and it has a lot of messy family drama. So the father of this family decides to announce to his daughters that he's going to marry a woman that is literally younger than them, and they're confused because he's actually still married to their mother, and she has dementia and lives in a facility. And so as the daughters kind of come to terms with the fact that their father just plans to up and divorce their mother and marry this woman who's less than half his age and even younger than them, things start to come out about their father that makes them kind of question his intentions and his history and like what kind of man he actually is. And so everyone is kind of put on eggshells around each other. Every person in this family has like this compulsive need to do something. We have one sister that just has this compulsive need to steal things, and like she just deals with so much anxiety that nothing really helps her release the pressure that she feels besides stealing things. She cannot stop stealing. And then there's the other sister who has a heavy amount of anxiety as well, and so she is a compulsive eater. She's also a baker, but she hides little treats and snacks around the place, and she just kind of eats her feelings. So as you go through the book, you're finding out more about the family's history, and you're trying to figure out which side of the family, either from the mom or the dad, that these two daughters get this compulsive need to do these things even when it's becoming entirely detrimental to them. After reading this book, I feel like this author is going to be an auto-buy author for me because her character work is very entertaining, especially in a mystery thriller. There's always representation in her books. Like one of the sisters in The Good Sister is actually autistic, and she meets a guy who's also autistic, and they have a very cute romance together, and I just enjoy the representation, the way that she fleshes out her characters and the mysteries that she writes about. I don't find her, like, they're supposed to be kind of like mystery thrillers. They're not thrilling. They're just very juicy in terms of like family drama. So I'm gonna keep reading them. You take from that what you will. It's definitely not the most thrilling experience, but I have found that I enjoy her writing just as much as I enjoy Samantha Downing. And so if that's something that sounds like your speed, I recommend that you check out either author. So the last books that I read in the month of April was the Shadow Children series. I think there are 6 books. I reread all 6 books, and I have not read these books since I was literally in like maybe 5th or 6th grade. These were my favorite books from my childhood, other than like Molly Moon. And for a long time I was really scared to reread books that I loved as a kid because I've heard stories about people reading it as an adult and not really loving it as much, and I just really wanted to keep the nostalgic feeling that I had around the Shadow Children. But I was just like, it's time. The time has come for me to reread these. So I did still enjoy these books, even though the last time I read them was like over a decade ago. I was very pleasantly surprised that I still enjoyed them as much. So since I read the books such a long time ago, I really only remembered the whole series in its entirety. So it was pretty cool to read each of the installations of the book and follow each character that we do, because we do a lot of like POV and character jumping throughout the series and actually like pinpoint, oh yeah, this is one of the books that I actually really loved, and this book was like the weakest one. Unfortunately, book 6 is the weakest in the series for me. I found that it had a very weak wrap up, and I was kind of disappointed in that. And that makes a lot of sense because even my memory before I started rereading them, I really only like focused on the first like 4 or 5 books, and I just never thought about how the series wrapped up. And that seems to be like my go-to thing because I also ignore the last season of Game of Thrones. I am very often disappointed, and I blip it out of my history and I don't think about it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of April. I did a good amount of reading, and I'm hoping to catch up on my backlisted TBR books in the month of May, and hopefully by June we'll be back with the TBR jar and we'll be able to pull some prompts from the jar. Thank you guys for watching this whole video. I will see you guys next time.